Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Emily and today I have my February wrap up. So February was much more successful as far as how many books I read in comparison to January. So I managed to read 10 books in February, which is double what I read in January, and so I'm feeling really good about that. I only had one 5-star book and it was a reread, so that was kind of disappointing. There wasn't any book that I read that was like, oh, this is a new favorite. There were a lot of books I really enjoyed, that's for sure, but yeah, nothing that like totally blew me out of the water or anything like that. With that being said, there were still some really good books and I'm excited to talk about them with you. They do span a couple different readathons as well as just books I was reading for fun because I wanted to. And so I'm going to just dive into the books that I read. I'm going to go through them in the order that I read them, and then if they did count for a particular readathon or something, I will throw that in there too. First book I read was my reread, and again it was 5 stars, and it was just, I needed it after finishing Nevernight because that was a trip and a half. I read Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo, which is the first book in the Grisha trilogy, the original trilogy in Leigh Bardugo's Grishaverse. This is such a good first book in a trilogy. I think if you know anything about this trilogy, most people, and I would agree with them, believe that the first book is the best and then it kind of goes downhill from there. So yeah, there's just like a lot of nostalgia with this. I'm not going to go in depth because I feel like at this point most people know this trilogy and are familiar enough with Leigh Bardugo, but I'm rereading this trilogy so that I can finally pick up King of Scars because I pre-ordered this and still haven't read it because I just felt like I had forgotten too much from the original trilogy. So I'm like 100 pages left in the second book, and then I will be reading the third one sometime before the end of this month as well. The next book I read was an audiobook, and that is Renegades by Marissa Meyer. This is a like superhero story where the world that we inhabit is sort of like futuristic, but essentially this futuristic society is run by the superheroes. They are sort of like, they make all the decisions, they have their own council that creates laws and such. There's kind of a mix of like reverence for these superheroes. I forget what they call themselves, not superheroes, but it's something like, but then there are also people who really dislike them and don't trust them. And our main character, Nova, is part of the like, yeah, does not trust the Renegades. Oh my god. The title of the book. She doesn't trust the Renegades and she is part of sort of the like rebellion. This is a world where a lot of people possess some sort of special ability or like superpower, and you can kind of like opt to audition to be a renegade and be part of this sort of elite society of superheroes. She blames the Renegades for her family's death, and so she decides to infiltrate and sort of like take it down from the inside. And yeah, she learned so much more about the like systems at play and everything that goes into the Renegades, and just learns a lot along her journey, I suppose. This audiobook is really fantastic. I enjoyed it a lot. I definitely will be continuing with the series. I already put a hold on Arch Enemies, which is the sequel, and I think there's a third book coming out. I will say I didn't love this. There was a lot that just had me kind of like rolling my eyes. First and foremost is that like the main hero, or I guess like the main players, are teenagers and they're given like really unlikely responsibilities, and it just felt like, come on, I doubt that would actually happen. I liked it. It was a fun read, but didn't quite live up to what I was hoping. I gave it a 3.5 because the action was great. It was definitely one that I wanted to continue listening to, and it definitely leaves off at the end like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen next? Which I always appreciate. So yeah, 3.5 for Renegades. Definitely continuing with the series. Next up, I read Odd One Out by Nic Stone. I read this as part of Blackathon, which was hosted by Jessie from Bow Ties and Books, Francina from Francina Simone, and Lauren from the novel Lush. I was under the impression that this was like a love triangle between 3 teenagers who all identified as bisexual, which is not the case. So that sort of threw me for a loop. It wasn't like, that's not bad. I just don't know where I ever came up with that idea or how I came to believe that. This one was okay. This is about 3 teenagers. Their names: Courtney, Coop, who's in the middle here, and then Ray and Jupiter. Courtney, who goes by Coop, and Jupiter have pretty much grown up together. They are best friends. They spend a ton of time together. Jupiter identifies as a lesbian and has said for a long time that she is into girls and she like has that as a central part of her identity. And Coop has a huge crush on Jupiter and like has a hard time kind of with accepting the fact that she does not like men, which was really hard to read about. So this is broken up into 3 parts, and the first section is from Coop's perspective, and it's basically him just like talking about how much he loves Jupiter and how much he like basically like wishes that she liked guys so that they could be together, and spends a lot of time like objectifying her essentially in his thoughts and like talking about her body, and just it was a little weird. And then I think within the first part of the book, we are introduced to Ray, who is a new girl in school, and Jupiter somehow befriends her and they become very close, and Coop is kind of like, is there something going on there? It seems like they are closer than just friends, but it turns out that Ray identifies as straight, and so everyone's a little bit confused, I guess. Then it's like Ray and Coop get together, and then there's like all this tension between the friend group. There's just like a lot of layers to this story. I will say I did not really like that it was broken up into 3 parts, like where we only got one perspective for each section. I felt like it would have been more enjoyable to like just continuously shift between perspectives. I don't know, I feel like that would have added more to the story, because by the end I wanted to kind of get inside Coop's head, but at that point it's been months since it's been his perspective. But yeah, I also just, again, there's a lot of like weird objectification of people's bodies and just like focusing a lot on that, which I didn't personally appreciate. I will say at the end, in the final section, with Jupiter, there's a lot of discussion about identity and the labels we choose to put on ourselves and why we do that and why we might choose not to. And I adored that. I thought that part was so well done, but I just didn't like any of the characters. They were all kind of awful to each other, and they did some really crappy stuff, and I don't know, I wasn't down with that. There's also some cheating that happens, FYI, so that is something to keep an eye out for if that's something that you do not personally want to read about. So this was kind of disappointing, I will be honest. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars in the end because I loved the ending, and I thought that was, yeah, just really well done, but most of it I was just like, meh. Oh, and like I said, I was reading this for Blackathon for the prompt More Than a Color, read about a black main character who identifies as LGBTQIA+, neurodivergent, or any other form of diversity. And like I said, Jupiter identifies as LGBTQIA+. Next, moving into the books that I read for Contemporary-a-thon. First one that I read was Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. This is a story that is told in verse. I literally read this in an hour over my lunch break at work. It is very difficult to read, but like in a good way. So Jason Reynolds writes a story about our main character, Will, whose older brother, Sean, was recently shot and murdered, like right outside of their home. And in Will's world, there are 3 rules. 1 is don't cry, 2 is don't snitch, and 3 is get revenge. And so Will, yeah, we meet him as, I think he is just about to find out about his brother's, or witness his brother's murder. And then we follow him from there to the point where he is now following rule number 3 and going to get revenge. He's going to find the man that killed his brother, or the man he believes that killed his brother. So he gets in an elevator, and as he starts going down the floors, each floor he stops at, a person gets in and he has to like confront. It's almost like Ghost of Christmas Past sort of deal, like someone from his past is coming back to visit him and like talk him through this. And the people that come to visit him, it's very emotional, and it's people who have meant a lot to him and have played a really significant role in his life. It's really heartbreaking because this is so real. There is so much like valid conversation happening in this book, and that just, it's awful, like that has to be true, or that is true. But I think that Jason Reynolds did a really good job of telling such a like painful and personal story in this format. I think it worked really, really well, and I already put a hold for the audiobook on my library account because I want to listen to him read it and hear how he reads it in verse. I will say, I feel like because it's like, just because of the nature of the format, it felt a little bit rushed, and that could have just been like the way that I was reading it. I think listening to it and not just like reading at a like really, I mean, I read decently fast, so that made it so that I read it really quickly. But I think taking the time to actually listen to it and move through it slowly would have brought it up to a 5-star. As it was, 4.5 stars from me. I read this for the dark, emotional, or taboo prompt for Contemporary-a-thon. Jason Reynolds also is a Black author, and Will is Black, so it's an own voices story about gun violence within the Black community, and yeah, so it definitely fits for Blackathon themes as well. I actually kind of planned on reading this in place of The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, which was the group book for Blackathon, because I read that in 2018, but this is like similar in that it's a Black author writing in verse, and so I was like, well, I definitely want to read this anyway, so I kind of counted it for both readathons. Next up, I read The Mothers by Brit Bennett, and I actually ended up listening to this via audiobook, even though I do have the physical copy. I just happened to find it from my library, and I wanted an audiobook for the readathon. I really, really liked this a lot. This counted as a book that I was meaning to read in 2018 but never got to, and it was in a non-traditional format as an audiobook as well. Also diverse, same with Long Way Down. But anyway, this is a story of 3 teens who are all growing up in a like Black community within Southern California, like LA, San Diego area, I want to say. We follow them from summer after their senior year of high school. Well, at least the main character, Nadia. She is finishing up her senior year, as is her friend, oh my god, how can I not remember anyone's name? Aubrey. And then we also follow Luke, who has been out of high school for a couple of years. But we follow them for several years. The real like start of the story is Nadia and Luke get together, and Nadia gets pregnant and decides that she wants to have an abortion, and Luke supports her, and they have a secret, and it's a little bit scandalous. Luke is the son of the town pastor, and Nadia is grieving her mother's suicide, so it's just like there's a lot wrapped up in this relationship and the decisions that they've made. Nadia finds herself working at that church that summer, and there she meets and befriends Aubrey, who is pretty religious and finds a lot of comfort in the church. There are so many like layers to the story. I don't know where to stop with a synopsis, but basically that summer is sort of what connects all 3 of them, and then they kind of grow from there, and we follow their stories as this secret follows them and as their lives continue to intertwine in varying ways. I really enjoyed this. I got so attached to all of the characters, and it was one of those books where like I was rooting for them and also angry at them all at different times, except for Aubrey. She was like so precious. I will say again, there are themes of cheating in this, and I just like, why can't we ever have like a book that's about romance or relationships or couples that like doesn't have that? Like, come on, please. That was my biggest complaint, and I just couldn't get by it. I felt like it didn't feel true to the characters, I felt. Overall, I give this 4 stars. I think this is definitely underhyped. I haven't really heard anyone talk about it, and I think it is definitely worth a read. Next up, I finished Forbidden Crown by Victoria Pinder, which I buddy read with Carrie from Carrie the Book Bell, and this was quite the book. This book is not good. It is like less than 200 pages, I think, and there are so many plot twists that are thrown in there. Like, there's not much of a plot. It's about a woman who is essentially hand-selected to become the wife of this prince of a fictional country. Basically just comes, finds her, tells her she's his perfect wife. Will she come and like come to his country and whatever, and yeah, because there's this like law that they've just uncovered that if he's not married by the age of 30, then he like gives up his right to the throne, and his father is in a coma, and like there's so much that happens, and his father's not in a coma, and then there are people attacking the palace, and then like they get rid of him. It's just like, oh my god, I was laughing and crying the whole way through this because it was just absolutely preposterous. It was just not well done. It was poorly written. The characters had no personalities. I will say it kept my interest. I would continue to read books by Victoria Pinder just because it is wildly entertaining in like the worst way. Not because it's good, but because it's just so bad. I give this 1.5 stars, the half star, because like I didn't hate it. Like, it wasn't something that I feel like any anger toward. And honestly, I'm a little intrigued because what else could she come up with? Every possible plot twist that she could have used was in the first book, so like what could possibly come next. Oh, I should say that one counted, what did it count? Oh, my most recently acquired contemporary, and what a journey that was. Next up, I read The Proposal by Jasmine Guillory. This was my contemporary-a-thon pick for a book that had Blurple on the cover. This is a story of our main character, I can't remember anyone's name, Nicole, who finds herself at a Dodgers game with this guy that she's sort of like casually dating, and he proposes to her on the big screen. She's totally taken by surprise. She says no. He throws a fit, and then obviously everyone is like staring at her and just like wanting to kind of harass her a little bit at the stadium. And Carlos, who is a side character in Jasmine Guillory's debut novel, The Wedding Date, he and his sister are also at the game, and he kind of goes to escort her out of the stadium so that she doesn't have to, like, you know, be there anymore, or like have cameras in her face, whatever. And from there, it's a romance. The two of them get together eventually. It's a little bit of a slow burn. It doesn't happen till probably halfway through, I would say. Overall, I really enjoyed this. I really liked Nicole as a character. I really enjoyed her friends, and Carlos is so sweet, and he's very thoughtful. He has his flaws, as everyone does, but I really liked him as a love interest and a main character. Like, we get perspectives from both of them. I've seen a lot of criticism that this book is just like poorly written and that the writing isn't anything great, which I guess I can understand, but for me, like, this is not a book that I'm going into like, I can't wait to see the lyrical writing and the beautiful craftsmanship of these paragraphs. That's just not what I care about in this novel. Like, I know that Jasmine Guillory can write really good characters and that they can have, like, yeah, good conversations. Her witty banter, I think, is fantastic. It totally works with my personal sense of humor, and that's what I wanted to read this for. While it may not be, like, critically speaking, like, well written or anything, like, special, that's not what I was focusing on. I didn't even notice that until I was reading reviews after, and I was like, okay, I guess I can see that, but I don't know, that's not something that's gonna, like, take away from it for me, I guess. Overall, I gave this 4 stars. I felt like the ending was a little bit abrupt, and I wish that there was more to sort of wrap things up nicely, or I guess just not wrap it up quite so nicely, if that makes sense. I wish it was a little bit of a messier ending. It just felt, I don't know, a little convenient. I prefer The Wedding Date to The Proposal, but I think there's another one coming out maybe this year, and I will definitely read it. Like I said, just really appreciate the, like, banter between characters in Guillory's novels, so I'll definitely read more from her in the future. Next up, I read Graphic Reproduction, a comics anthology that is edited and compiled by Jenell Johnson. This is a collection of comics that Jenell Johnson has, like, sourced and found to provide a narrative about reproductive rights and health and struggles and all of that, and it was really interesting. I didn't realize that it was Jenell Johnson, like, pulling sources and such from the past. Like, there are some of these comics were written in, like, the 70s, I think, which I thought that was really cool. I thought in some cases it was very inclusive. There were a lot of different types of relationships talked about in this story, and then, you know, it gave voice to miscarriages and abortions and totally normal and natural births and pregnancies and stuff. So there was a lot of different perspectives brought in. I wish there was a little bit more about race included, because that impacts reproductive health for sure, and I don't think that's talked about nearly enough. And so that's, like, the one thing that I thought was missing from this collection. But again, this is just, like, one anthology that's been compiled, and this is definitely not, like, trying to be a definitive voice on the subject matter. And there are a lot of contributors to this as well, which is really cool. There's, like, a whole, like, textbook section before the comics start, which is pretty cool. I will say I skimmed it. I was just not prepared for that at the time that I picked this up. And then lots of source material listed as well, so other things that you could potentially peruse if you wanted some more info. I thought this was really interesting and really hard to read, honestly. Reading about, like, miscarriages is heartbreaking. Reading about fertility struggles and people who go through multiple rounds of fertility treatments like that. I know it sucks having like to think about that. Like, not that I'm saying I don't want to, because that's a very real problem that people have, and I think it is not talked about enough, but it's really hard to read about those struggles. It's so sad. I definitely found myself tearing up as I read through some of these stories. I found this very randomly at my library. I don't know how widely accessible it is, but it was super interesting, and I will link or list the titles of all of the comics down below as well, so that maybe you could find them somewhere. I'll see if I can find them for you and link them if possible, but I don't know. This one is just like, I'm glad it was compiled, but it also is just really hard to think about, and I'm feeling anxious and emotional just talking about it. But anyway, 4 stars. It was really totally different than anything I've ever read, and I'm really glad that I read it. All right, my last one for Contemporary-a-thon is The Wife Between Us by Greer, Hendricks, and Sarah Pekkanen. I read this for a book with a picture on the spine. I had put this on my winter TBR as well as a mystery thriller that I really wanted to read in the first like quarter of 2019. I feel like having read this makes it even harder to summarize, because I don't know how to talk about it. Overall, I loved the first half, and there's a twist about exactly halfway through that blew me away. I like did not see it coming and was shocked, and it was really good. From there, felt like the story just kind of went downhill a little bit. It was like a slow, steady decline down, and then we get to the epilogue, and it's like, the epilogue was so stupid. I hated it. Could it have been left out? There was no need for it. If it hadn't been there, probably would have liked it more. So Greer, Hendricks, and Sarah Pekkanen, this is their first like duo co-authored novel. They've since released another one that I own and definitely want to read. But one of them, I forget which one, has spent most of her time as an editor. Greer Hendricks, she has spent most of her professional career as an editor, and then Sarah Pekkanen has written like 7 or 8 other novels, I want to say. And I feel like you can kind of get that. Like, knowing that made sense. Like, one of them, this is the first book she's ever written. The other one has some experience. And not to say that that can't work, but some of the like stilted storytelling and some of the issues that I had with it felt like, okay, I guess this could kind of explain that. I think it's worth a read. I am happy that I read it. It had a lot of really good stuff about it, and like I said, the first half was like 5 stars for me. I was really into it. Also incredibly addicting. Like, I could not put this down despite being a little bit like on it as it was finishing up. So I ended up giving this 3.5 stars, and yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed, I'll be honest, but I still liked it enough that I would definitely read more by these 2 authors in the future. And then the final book that I read in February was not part of any readathon or anything like that. It was pretty unexpected. City of Glass by Cassandra Clare. This is the 3rd book in the Mortal Instruments series, the final book in the original trilogy that she released, that follows shadow hunters, who are basically like demon hunters, and vampires and werewolves and warlocks and fae and all of that. Like, it all comes together in one world. And if you saw my January wrap-up, then you know I hated the 2nd book in the series, City of Ashes. It was a 2-star for me, like a pretty generous 2-star. I'll be honest, I really didn't like it. And the first half of City of Glass, I was feeling very similarly. I nearly DNF'd it and like gave up on the entire series. But now I have, you know, I finished the first quarter of this behemoth of a series, and I feel committed to finishing it. We'll see if that continues. But the second half of City of Glass I actually really liked, and I felt really engaged in listening to it, whereas in the first half I was kind of like, I can't believe I'm listening to this, oh my god. The second half, like I said, I just felt more engaged. I felt like more happened, and also set up for more things to be discussed and expanded upon in other parts of the series. So I actually ended up really liking the end of it, and so that's why I gave it 3 stars overall. Still, this book is ridiculous, and I still don't really like a lot of the characters all that much. Like I said, I want to at least continue with the next series and see how I feel. It's definitely not one that I feel like is going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so, like, I can't imagine my life before reading this series or anything like that. But I know that the later books in this series are pretty widely loved, so I'm excited to see that. But yeah, I kind of still can't believe that I actually read it and that I am planning to read the next ones as well. Also, I completely forgot to say that The Proposal was also my romance pick for the Blackthon challenge. I had a really good reading month. I'm really feeling excited about what March has in store. There are a couple different readathons that I'm really looking forward to, and I feel like are going to be just fantastic. If you've read any of these books and feel similarly or want to discuss them or have suggestions based on my thoughts and feelings that I've mentioned, please let me know in the comments down below. You can also find my social media accounts in the description box if you would like to be friends with me there. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on my next video. But until then, happy reading. Bye.